And welcome to Monday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com, as well as the mobile app. He's Paul Dottino. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes, and multiple ways you can interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You can also hit us up on Twitter, #GiantsChat. And a reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast. So we're going to recap, provide some takeaways from the first preseason game Friday night in Detroit between the Lions and the Giants, and also some highlights from today's practice. I want to start, though, Paul, off the top with Brian Daboll, because he gave at least somewhat of an update on some of the guys that came out of the game banged up and perhaps the outlook. The two main injuries from the preseason game on Friday was Cordell Flott and Colin Johnson.
Right.
I would put those two atop the list. Flott had an abdominal injury, and he was back on the practice field, so that's encouraging.
Didn't do a ton, though.
Correct, but at least he's back in the mix.
Yes, he is.
Colin Johnson did not practice, and when Brian Daboll was asked about his knee injury, he said he doesn't think it's long-term, but said he's also not a doctor. That's what he had added at the end. That's not necessarily good nor bad. We're not going to sit here and interpret it for the next 60 minutes or try to play doctor or hope that you at home are going to try to play a doctor. But, I mean, the unfortunate part about Colin Johnson, Paul, obviously, is you're talking about a guy that worked so hard to get back.
No doubt.
And I think he's had a very productive camp again, similar to what we saw last year, that you hate to see any type of setback that keeps him off the field, especially when there's so much competition at that position.
Yeah, I think when you look at Johnson, you're looking at a guy who not only has done everything they've asked to come back off of that serious injury last year, but you're also looking at a guy who uses his physicality very well in the run game. He is definitely an excellent medium-range receiver, not necessarily a burner because we know he doesn't have great speed to get downfield and take off the top. But when it comes to the short stuff and the intermediate stuff, he's got strong hands. He knows how to use his body like a basketball player to box out. So
because he has the size of that.
There's little doubt in my mind. And I remember when he came out of Texas a few years ago, I was hoping that the Giants would look at him late day 3. I thought he was a dark horse guy for me. Jaguars got him in the 6th round. We know what he's done since he's been here. I think this guy can play in the National Football League. I think he belongs on somebody's 53. Now, with the Giants, especially with this injury, I think it's going to be extremely difficult right now. If you ask me, is he going to be the 6, or maybe if they squeeze out 7 receivers on the 53, I just don't know that he gets in there. But I will say this, if he doesn't make it, I fully would expect him to be on the practice squad. I think they would love to have him stay in the building.
Oh, without a doubt. You just wonder, though, if he is healthy, then other teams could come calling and claim him off of waivers. He's the type of guy that has enough experience. And to your point, Paul, he offers teams something different because of his size.
Yeah.
You don't have big guys like that who play with as much versatility as he brings to the table.
And a good guy, too.
Sure. Yeah.
Really good teammate. And that always helps your chances of trying to find a job in the league. I will say this, though. If this knee injury, and my understanding is that it is minor, but it's going to cost him some practice time. It might even cost him a game or two in the preseason.
Yeah, well, a minor injury could be a week or two. You don't
know.
Yeah.
That will limit the opportunity for other teams to see him because, remember, they're not at practice like we are every day. All they get to see are the preseason games. So they don't know how well Colin Johnson has done during this entire offseason at daily practices. They don't know that. So, if you're the Giants, I hate to say this because it's not fair to Colin Johnson because he's dinged, but it may work to the Giants' advantage to be able to sneak him through waivers and get him on the practice squad because he hasn't put any preseason plays on tape that are worth scooping up.
No, all fair points. It's just he's a little bit different from some of the other younger guys because Colin Johnson has regular season games. So
yeah,
even though it would be a potential move on the part of another team because you're banking on that, A, he's healthy, and B, he can still be productive, you're probably familiar with him because of what he already did with the Jacksonville Jaguars, is what I'm saying.
Now, I will say this. If you're looking at him as the skyscraper in the room that is supposed to be competing with Bryce Ford Wheaton, the undrafted rookie free agent who has much more speed but doesn't quite have the physicality
And the consistency, too.
Well, Bryce Ford Wheaton did not show a lot of consistency in the game in Detroit the other night. He had a chance to make a couple of plays and did not do it. This is a great example, folks, and I think it's important that everybody understands this. While preseason snaps are meant to give players opportunities to earn more, well, there's also an opportunity to earn less. You can hurt your chances and hurt your stock when you go out there and don't necessarily get the job done during a preseason game. Bryce Ford Wheaton's stock right now has to be on down after what happened in Detroit.
Far as other injuries go, Jamie Gillen was roughed up a little bit for the preseason game. He seems to be okay, and he was out there on the practice field today. And then you have DJ Davidson coming off of PUP. So he's the latest individual. Now, that means there's two other guys still on PUP. You got Wan'Dale Robinson, you have Aaron Robinson. And when Brian Dable was asked about the status of those two guys earlier today, his response was, quote, "I just say making progress, but no timetable yet," end quote. And if you remember, he was asked about Wan'Dale Robinson in previous weeks, and, every week it tends to change. So you can't read too much into this, but, the clock is ticking. We're nearing the start of the season, and you and I have had conversations that if there's a guy that's on the fence, Paul, then you leave him on PUP, as far as I'm concerned. There's no point. You take him off of PUP because you're ultra confident that he will be available and ready to play in week 1. If there's a chance he's 50-50, he's iffy, I'd rather roll the dice and say, okay, take the first 4 weeks of the regular season, get back to as close to 100% as possible, and then we'll have the option to activate you when week 5 rolls around.
Well, that's why DJ Davidson, the defensive tackle who was brought off of PUP today, really is going to have to accelerate his work in practice this week because there are 2 preseason games left. Now, Jordan Riley showed some things against the run in Detroit. Other than that, the rest of the defensive tackle mix, Kobe Smith made a few plays, but it was not an overwhelmingly wonderful performance by the backup DTs. So if DJ Davidson can hustle himself onto the field for the Panthers game or for the Jets game and really show out, he's got himself a chance now, even though he's a latecomer to the party, of maybe sneaking onto the roster.
And also somebody that was drafted with the new regime, too.
Yes.
Let's not overlook that. And you tend to give those players maybe a little bit more leeway and flexibility because there's a reason why you brought them in. Let's stay on the defensive side of the ball as far as takeaways are concerned from this first preseason game. Clearly, the safeties were the standouts in terms of what Pinnock did and what Belton did. Opportunistic plays, you always like to see that. And you and I were talking off the air. We're always trying to figure out who's going to be the guy lining up next to Xavier McKinney more often than not. But when it's all said and done, I think both of those guys will be in the mix, especially when Wink Martindale turns to 3 safeties or they try to play another guy close to the line of scrimmage. So it's not, to me, these 2 guys competing for one spot. They're both competing for prominent roles within this defense.
Correct, and I think based off of the week in Detroit, not just the game, but what we saw during the dual practices, and quite frankly, the entire training camp to this point, Pinnock clearly has the edge to be the starter next to McKinney, but I do think Belton is going to be the 3rd safety and will play an awful lot. So does it really matter who's the 2 and who's the 3? McKinney's the 1. We know that.
Yeah.
But the 2 and 3, it doesn't really matter a whole ton because Belton will probably play, I don't know, at least 75% of the snaps that Pinnock plays anyway.
Now, the other aspect on the defensive side of the ball, we were talking about this throughout the offseason, that the elite defenses, Paul, I always say, have that 3rd pass rusher. It's not just the top 2 guys.
Right.
It's that 3rd option. And in fairness, the Giants, I think they're still searching for that player to emerge. And I'm not saying any of these guys I'm going to name is going to become the reliant 3rd guy, but you did see O'Shane Zimenez, you saw Tamon Fox, and then I'll throw in Abba Baldonado, the undrafted rookie out of Pitt. All 3 of those guys made splash plays in the preseason game, right? A sack, a quarterback hit, some disruptive
tackle
force.
For a loss.
Correct, against the quarterback. And you also had, for example, a guy like Baldonado. He actually could have had another sack. Unfortunately, he was called for roughing the passer.
What'd you think of that call?
It was close, but the way the NFL operates, and I thought it was a good call, if you put your hands, regardless of what the intent is, Paul, in the vicinity of the head of the quarterback, they're going to flag you. So I really don't think he had a lot of wiggle room with respect to that. I know people watching it at full speed, it's a ticky-tack. No, the clear rules say
I get you.
your hands are in the vicinity of the quarterback, it's going to be a flag. So I did not have an issue with the call.
I understand your perspective on it, and you're right. If you're going to call the rule to the letter of the law,
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. But to me, if I'm the coach, I got to say, yeah, be more careful, but that's good football play.
100%. And I think that is the teachable point that you bring up. If you're Brian Dable, you're Wink Martindale, you love the energy. You love the fact that he won his one-on-one battle. He got in position. You just got to be more disciplined when you're looking to finish the play. You got to keep your hands in an area where you use them to wrap up the quarterback as opposed to try to get him in the head. And listen, Paul, we break these plays down all throughout the regular season. It's easy for us to say from afar what a player should do. I get it. When you're a player, when you're in the moment in the game, right? Okay.
Yes.
You ask any player. It's not just an NFL
No
player,
doubt.
college, high school. It's hard in the moment to say, okay,
No
where
doubt.
are my hands? I've got to put my hands down. I understand it. So when the criticism goes towards the player, yes, it's a talking point, but sometimes those fundamentals in the heat of the moment, right, they get thrown to the wayside.
Well, especially when you're trying so hard to make a play and get noticed during the preseason.
Absolutely.
Because you know that a splash play will help your chances.
Especially a guy like Baldonado.
You know, I'll tell you what, there were two other guys who I thought, and by the way, Shane Lemieux played very well on the offensive line during the second half. We know Schmitz and Banks did very well in the first half while they were able to get in the game. But I thought there were two guys, the dark horse guys. Remember, every camp I like to pick a dark horse guy, and he can't be a draft pick, and he can't be a high-profile free agent. I think there's a guy on this team, Alex Cook, the safety out of Washington. I thought he wrapped up well, he hit well, he showed awareness. Alex Cook is my dark horse guy, the undrafted rookie free agent from training camp that I'm picking as my dark horse guy. I'm going to say he probably does not make the 53 because I think it's too tight. But he will be on the practice squad, and at some point this season, he will be activated. That's what I'm going to tell you right now. Alex Cook.
Baldonado's always been my dark horse. I brought him up earlier with you in the offseason, so I'm sticking with him. That's why I highlighted him. And other players I think that are worthy of mentioning, and this is not a dark horse, but speaking of rookie class members, Eric Gray, okay, he maybe didn't have like a wow me play, Paul, but I like the fact that he handled the return game well. Okay, I know he got tripped up on one. He had the nice return. Unfortunately, there was a holding call.
36 yards.
So that's not necessarily against Eric Gray, but you want to see him be in the right spot, not make those mental mistakes, be involved in the run game, have them throw the ball to him out of the backfield.
You want to see him not screw up.
Yeah,
right?
That's one way to put it. Sure. Yeah.
Now, he missed one blitz pickup, which got the quarterback in nasty trouble. But other than that, he fundamentally did everything he had to do.
Yeah, and that's why I look at it as it's an encouraging performance.
I agree.
Okay, somebody who you know could very well be a key component on the depth chart. We understand they have Saquon Barkley. We know they have Matt Breida. But there could be a role for Eric Gray as a complimentary running back. And forget running game on special teams. Right now, you look at the depth chart, Paul, especially with Gary Brightwell hurt, Eric Gray could very well be week one. He could be the punt and the kickoff return guy.
Coach is going to continue to give him reps as the punt returner and the kickoff returner, basically to not only let him prove himself, but to let him prove that he should be not just in the mix, but the guy. I think it's possible that Brightwell, even when healthy, does not get the job back. If Gray shows over the next few weeks that he can handle it, they'll just give it to him. I really believe that because they'd like to get this rookie on the field as soon as possible. And, you know, we talked about it all before training camp. Who is going to be the kick returner? Who is going to be the punt returner? And we were taking all kinds of guesses. Is it Darnay Holmes? Is it Brightwell? Is it Crowder? Is it Pimpleton? We're throwing all kinds of names out there. And yet, in the last 2 weeks, 1 week and a half or so, before going into Detroit, you started to see, oh, Gray's taking punt returns now. That looks like something they're kind of interested in. And then all of a sudden, boom, they get to Detroit, and now he's taking punt returns and kickoff returns in practice. And the light goes on. Okay, they want this guy to try to win that job.
And it also relates to a conversation you and I were having off the airwaves in the early stage of the offseason. I think a lot of the discussion that you and I had was, are you at the point when you evaluate this 53-man roster, do you have to justify keeping a player that's just a return man? just a special
You don't have to worry about that with him, do you?
And that's, I think, the attractive component, Paul.
Yeah.
That's why it's worth highlighting, because if the Giants coaching staff throughout their evaluation process, if they come to grips with the fact, we like Eric Gray, we feel confident, we know he can handle it, and we know he could be the punt guy and the kickoff guy. Now, all of a sudden, you say to yourself, okay, Eric Gray was going to be on the roster as a running back to begin with, right? We just drafted him. So it wasn't a question about him being a bubble guy, and he could be our return guy. Now, we don't necessarily have to keep a wide receiver who only was probably going to get on the field as a return guy. It completely changes the conversation. Now,
it does.
You hope that these guys hold up and stay healthy, because all bets are off if that doesn't happen. But when you're looking at other players and the likelihood of them making the roster, Eric Gray, he doesn't just impact his own cause. He impacts a lot of these other guys.
Crowder,
yep,
Pimpleton, Mickens.
All
of
three
a
of them.
sudden, those guys who knew that they were not going to make the roster strictly as wide receivers, they were going to need special teams considerations to get onto the 53. All of a sudden, Gray seizing that job, if in fact he does, puts those guys in a very precarious spot.
And Jeff Smith's another guy.
He's already gone.
No, but he was another guy in the conversation is what I'm saying.
He was.
What we were talking about, right? They brought him in. Oh, special team guy. But another wide receiver. Where do you put him? Well, he better prove that he can be a return guy. Obviously, he's not part of the conversation anymore, but still, that was somebody else that we had thrown in the group for the bulk of the offseason. One other thing I want to get to in terms of takeaways, Paul.
Real quick.
You mentioned Shane Lemieux on the offensive line. I think a lot of people, they watched that Lions game, and let's face it, the results were not pretty when Tommy DeVito was in with a lot of the backup offensive linemen. The Lions were providing a lot of pressure and win more often than not, right? Specifically, the Okwara brothers.
He was under duress.
Yeah, he was. But it's important to note that the starters weren't out there. The group that the Giants will hopefully have out there week one, especially Evan Neal was in concussion protocol. Andrew Thomas didn't play. Now, Ben Bredesen was out there for a little bit, okay, because they're trying to mix and match him. But you didn't really get a feel of how that starting five unit is going to operate.
And we may never get that during the preseason.
Until week one, correct.
Because Neal now is still doing non-contact drills, not cleared for any contact yet because of the protocol.
Yeah.
So when will we see the starting 5-0 linemen? Heck, I hate to say this because I think it makes me a little bit nervous. It may not come until the Dallas game. That's possible.
Sure.
That is possible.
Yeah.
But of the reserves that did play the other day in the second half, Lemieux played guard exclusively, and I thought he was the best of the bunch.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, once again, the motivation is through the roof for him. Not to say that he needed extra, but he understands there's a critical year. Roster spot's not guaranteed. And the mindset also, even though he exclusively played guard, I think he also is trying to sell himself as a backup insurance policy center.
He is. Anderson played center during the second half of the game in Detroit, but for whatever reason, they decided to keep those two guys in those spots for the entire third and fourth quarters. I don't know what the reason was, but Lemieux to me did stand out and help himself.
And I think coming out of the preseason game, the most interesting position battle, of course, outside of a lot of the other spots that we've been talking about, specifically receiver, is the third tackle, the swing tackle. I think right now you take into consideration the Matt Pearts of the world, and then you look at also a Tyree Phillips who is getting some guard work. You just wonder who's going to emerge, Paul, out of that spot.
Pert has come on over the course of the last week and a half to 2 weeks. Since Neal went down with the concussion protocol, Pert has been the guy, and Phillips is also dinged up.
Yep.
That has allowed Pert to get more reps and to develop a little bit more consistency and comfort. I think Pert right now, at least in practice and camp and in the preseason game, is probably playing the best he's played since he got to the Giants. Now, he still needs to do better if he's going to be the number 3 guy, because I still think he and Phillips are involved in a battle. Now, Phillips can't do anything about that because he's injured. Pert has to take a grip on this. And I'd say this week and going into the Panthers game, I don't know how likely it is that Phillips comes back for the Carolina game. That's another big chance for Pert to start putting a squeeze on the number 3 tackle spot.
Well, and remember, Phillips played last season in that spot. So the Giants have a litmus test to operate with. It's more of, and I think this is what you were heading towards. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to me, it's up to Peart. The onus is on him to give the Giants a reason to say, okay, Phillips shouldn't be the guy.
Right.
As opposed to vice versa.
He has to win the job.
Exactly. So I don't look at, I mean, I understand Phillips is not on the field, but to me, I don't think it's as detrimental to him. It's more of what Peart does to give the coaching staff something to think
That's
about.
fair.
All right, let's get to a few reminders before we open up the phone lines. Giants Huddle Podcast, you can check that out on your favorite podcast platform. You could also go to giants.com/podcasts. Coming up on Sunday, October 8th, 9 a.m. Eastern, MetLife Stadium, Run or Walk with Giants Legends. Giants Foundation will host a 5K race kids run presented by Quest. Net proceeds will benefit the Giants Foundation. All participants will receive a commemorative T-shirt. And after the race, stay for a post-race festival with appearances by Giants legends and a live DJ. You can register now at giants.com/5K. Also, I'm told by a good source, the winner will race Paul Dottino one-on-one. That is to be announced at a date later to be determined. I don't know if you heard about that. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk. So this is actually a scouting.
Is that part of my deal
trial.
here?
It is. Well, you didn't know. I'm the bearer
I did
of
not
bad
know.
news. Yes. So I hope you dust off the shoes. I know you're already preparing yourself, but the
Okay.
winner, whoever survives this and crosses the finish line first, will then have to really
I'll tell you
be
what,
put up to the test.
I got
Yes.
a lot of good training with a ton of miles in Detroit.
Oh, I don't doubt
I
that at
racked
all.
up some big-time numbers during that week.
You left your mark both literally and figuratively.
Just so you know. Hey,
within
by the
that
way,
Michigan
before we
region.
get to the
Yes.
calls, happy birthday to the late Wellington Mara. One of the greatest people in the world that you'd ever want to meet. He was a very important guy to me, for sure. And today he would have been 107 years old. And I think everybody who was attached to this organization, even though his dad, Tim, was the one who founded the Giants back in 1925, I think we all know Wellington, a Hall of Famer, and it took too long to get him in there. He's as much a part of the fabric of the NFL as anybody could possibly imagine, and I just wanted to throw that out there.
Absolutely, and we echo your sentiments. Few other reminders here before we open up the lines. As far as the upcoming season, you can take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships, they're now available. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available, and the NFL schedule is officially out, so that means single-game tickets are on sale now as well. Don't miss the Giants at MetLife Stadium this season. You can visit giants.com/tickets to secure your seat. And last but not least, the Giants official connected TV streaming app. It's Giants TV, brings you original video content, game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV, it's free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and the Giants mobile app. All right, let's open up the lines at 201-939-4513. Hashtag Giants Chat on Twitter. You can also reach out to us on our own individual accounts. Tom is in Stratford. He gets us going here on BBKL. What's happening, Tom? What do you got for us?
Hi, Lance and Paul.
Hi.
Happy Monday.
You too.
I know it's just a preseason game, but I just made some general observations I'd like to share with you guys and see if you agree or not. But I think both Banks and especially kind of Trey Hawkins were very impressive to me, especially that opening drive. Hawkins was all over that guy, resulting in that interception. So it's nice to see our secondary making interceptions, and that was a very nice run back, I thought, by Mr. Belton there. So I like that. I liked Beasley and Crowder. They really showed me something, especially Beasley. Boy, that guy gets open all the time, you know?
He's crafty. Yeah.
It's impossible for me not to put him on my 53. Now, I don't know I don't know what the Giants front office thinks. We know he's going into his 13th NFL season at 34 years old. But in my opinion, Cole Beasley does what he does as well as anybody in the league. The short yardage, the moves, the separation, the craftiness, the hands. I have a hard time believing this guy almost retired. In fact, he kind of did retire last year.
Then he came back.
And then came back.
And he never gets hurt.
Oh, durable? You're absolutely right. And Brian Daboll told us the other day that not only is he been a leader to the wide receivers in the room because they constantly pick his brain and ask him questions, even guys like Saquon Barkley, other players on offense go to him and ask him for his wiliness and his experience and all the kinds of things that he might be able to teach them. So I don't know. How does he not make the team? I don't know.
He also knows the system,
He's
too,
my
which helps.
team.
Anyway.
One other thing. I thought Jordan Riley, I thought he had a good game. And I agree with you, Paul. I thought Lemoon looked good, too. I saw him pancake a number of people. I know it was the second half, but it's more than I've seen him in the past. And at least he was out on the field playing, so that's good. But I will say this: it's a shame about Colin Johnson getting hurt again. Hopefully, it's a minor injury. He can come back. I think on the other flip side,
Ford Whedon,
yeah, he's maybe practice squad at this point after that game. I mean, we don't need drops. He had 2 drops that I saw. Or slipped. He slipped and fell and he dropped.
Let's say this: 2 opportunities to make a play that he did not make. How about that?
Exactly. So put him on the practice squad. Let him learn some more. And finally, my final comment is: I think Wyatt Davis and Corey Cunningham and Rodarius Williams. If this was back in the old days when we were cutting down from 90 to 75, I think they'd be gone. So I thought they had very poor games. So that's all I have. Take
all right,
my
Tom.
call.
Yep, you got it. Appreciate the phone call. And I think they probably would have lasted a little bit longer because the 75-man cut, that came after the second preseason game. So they still would have hung around. I don't think it would have been that soon, to the caller's point, based on the old rules. But, yeah, I mean, as we echoed pretty much at the beginning of the show, I think we had very similar observations. I don't think one game defines a young guy, though, so I wouldn't necessarily say, somebody's roster spot has completely dissipated after one game. But we know, we've talked about this theme, the wide receiver position has an overwhelming amount of competition. And if you're a young guy and an undrafted guy and you don't shine during games, it's hard for you to stand out unless, Paul, in practice every day, you're just wowing the coaching staff. So that's why I think the preseason game for a young wide receiver is that much more important because there's limited options in practice as it goes. So you got to be able to capitalize.
Quickly, I'll give you another position that's not necessarily overflowing, but it becomes a very interesting position to look at, and that's the linebacker spot. I'm not talking about the edge guys, but the guys on the inside. We know Okerake's here. We know that that Beavers is going to make it. And we think McFadden's going to make it because he's been getting so many reps transitioning as a split with Beavers during the course of camp. And McFadden is getting so much praise from everybody around here, it's making you feel like he might even be the starter in week 1 next to Okereke.
Or at least play a notable role.
For sure.
Yeah.
Now, if they keep 4 inside linebackers, first of all, do they do it? Second of all, if they do, the 2 guys right now who seem to be in a battle are Carter Coughlin and Deontay Johnson. Now, I think a big part of that equation, in fact, it may be 90% of that equation, is what can you give me on special teams? And, I think that's going to be a hell of a battle the next 3 weeks.
And Coughlin is appealing because of his length from a special teams perspective. He also has a little bit more experience. But, what do we say? When you have a new regime and they didn't draft you, you never know how things are going to play out. And this is a critical year for him, just like it is Shane Lemieux, Matt Peart, all these guys that have these expiring rookie contracts. I mean, they know this could very well be the end of the line.
Now, we know Coughlin likes to hit, and we know he likes to blitz, and he's fully capable of doing that. Well, what did we see the other day? Johnson, not so much athletic. He's more of a thumper.
Yep.
And plays the run pretty well, gets his nose in there between the tackles, and he also had a big hit on a quarterback on a blitz.
And that goes under the umbrella of some of those other disruptive plays that we were talking about is the Giants. I mean, we could sit here and talk about the interior linebackers. Hey, if you could get some of those productive, disruptive plays from the interior guys, I mean, that's icing on the cake, especially within Wink Martindale's defense. Let's head back to the lines. We got Cliff in New York joining us here on BBKO. What's happening, Cliff? What do you got for us?
Hey, guys. Thanks for the rundown on Friday. On the pass protection problems, I'm wondering. I'm seeing some hope there. Actually, wasn't it a lot better pass protection wise in the first half than the second half? Because I have a reason for asking.
Much better?
Not much better, huh?
Well, I mean,
it seemed like it really fell off in the second half.
Well, here's the difference. John Michael Schmitz had a terrific first half. Okay,
that's what I'm getting at.
He was about as good as you could expect in a guy making his NFL debut, albeit a preseason game. He was really, really solid, and he got out on the edge too. A lot of times he was out there on the move, and he showed that as well. But to be frank with you, I mean, like Corey Cunningham was playing one of the tackle spots there, and then they had Wyatt Davis come in and play in the second half, and I think it's fair to say both guys struggled. And that's an edge spot, which is why when we consider the backup tackle role, I don't think either guy is really put himself in a good spot in that mix.
Yeah, so Davis is a tackle?
He's really a guard. He's not a tackle by trade. He's a guard. But they were so desperate because they were down guys. Phillips is hurt. Hamilton's hurt. Thomas was not going to play.
And McKeithen
Neal
just came off
hurt.
of PUP. Yeah.
McKeithen just came off PUP. They had no one else to put out there. So they had to put Davis in there at tackle, and it didn't work out so well.
Also, if Davis makes the team, I'm not saying he will. I mean, he has to prove he could play multiple positions too.
Yeah.
So they have a reason to want to test him at perhaps a position that is not necessarily his strong suit.
Remember what I said to you earlier. Sometimes opportunity is a chance for you to work yourself off the team too. It can happen that way.
Okay. So we were shorthanded.
Yes.
That's the bottom line.
Yes. Well, Thomas was the only other healthy tackle they had, and they weren't going to play him. So are you going to put Pert and Cunningham in for all 4 quarters? That's a little unfair to those guys right out of the box in the first preseason game.
Yeah, that's why, Cliff, I think to me the biggest takeaway is you have to understand that the guys that did struggle, they may not end up making the team because the bottom line is they're evaluating who perhaps could be in the running for a backup guard or tackle spot. These are none of the starters, and we're talking about, I mean, if you really take into consideration Wyatt Davis and Corey Cunningham, you're talking about guys that are third on the depth chart at given positions. Right. And you normally don't keep a guy on the offensive line that's on the third line on your depth chart. He's got to jump to the second line to realistically have a shot to make the team.
It would be very helpful if McKeithen is healthy enough to give them some snaps over the course of the next 2 games, because I know they really have high hopes for him. Even though he's thought to be a guard, that's okay if they've got enough guards right now. If he makes the team and can be a sub where you plug him in anywhere you need him, well, in a year or 2, maybe he competes for a starting job. I mean, Glowinski won't be here forever.
Sure. And he moved around in North Carolina, so that's nothing new for him.
Well, I'm still rooting for Corey. I think I was thinking about the 10 through 14 offensive linemen, if that's how many we can get on the practice squad. I mean, it seems like we have an opportunity to have guys on there who have been around for a couple of years and have the advantage of knowing the system and would not be such super players that they would be, poached by another team off our practice squad.
Sure, I think that's realistic. Yeah, I don't think that's crazy. But, I mean, I think the Giants are looking at it more from the standpoint of, at least when it comes to the 53-man roster, in the event that so-and-so goes down, who do we turn to and how good do we feel about that player coming in? And that has to be the answer for the 53-man roster. Cliff, you could store as many guys as you want on the practice squad, but the Giants are considering, God forbid, we got to put this guy in a game. What exactly are we going to get out of that player? That has to be the thought process.
But they'd be better. They'd be better than the proverbial hold the fort guys, wouldn't they? At least the way they seemed to perform last year, better than they did last night. Friday night.
Well, you never know. I mean, that's the other part to this equation. They're looking at the rest of the league as well. And is there a guy who they think could be, let's say, the 8th or 9th lineman who gets cut, who's better than what they have now? They're constantly looking to upgrade. I can't guarantee you that, let's say, the 9 or 10 even linemen that they keep on the 53 are all here right now. I can't guarantee you that.
Yeah, I mean, that could very well be a spot they grab a guy or 2 off of waivers.
It could happen.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then the big takeaway then maybe is the play of Schmitz, because it seems like just, being cautious and not getting carried away, it seems like it's not that big of a risk to have him on the field against the Cowboys.
Not
in
at
Week
all.
1, is it?
I've been saying all along, in a perfect world, you'd love for his learning curve to be fast enough that he can start Week 1 against Dallas, but you don't know that. I've said that all along. Be cautious, pump the brakes. You don't know that. To this point, he's on the fast track to start Week 1 against Dallas. As it stands today, that doesn't mean it will be in 3 weeks.
And appreciate the phone call, Cliff. Thanks for giving us a ring. I mean, once again, I think perspective is needed in the conversation, encouraging results.
Right.
You like how he handled himself. Very similar to how we were talking about Eric Gray, right? The mental mistakes, you avoid those things. But once again, the caliber of the competition within the context of the game, who Dallas has to offer, that can't be overlooked. That's the next stage of this dialogue.
How about Dan Quinn? It's not just the competition.
100. His style, his
it's
aggressiveness.
Dan Quinn and his scheme.
Yeah.
Boy, he's going to be biting off a very big hamburger if he starts against Dallas. That's not to say he can't compete and can't handle it, but, they've got to make that decision in the next 3 weeks or so. They've got to figure out, is it fair? Has he come along quick enough that he's prepared to compete in that game? They want him to be. And to this point, I think the answer is yes. But again, pump the brakes.
Well, and also the fact that Bredesen is getting work at guard, who is, by the way, listed. I know it's the unofficial depth chart, but he's listed as the backup center. That to me is another indication that they're going to do everything in their power to make sure John Michael Schmitz is ready to go at the center spot.
And by the way, Bredesen's had a good camp himself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to just ignore him, because when he came out of Michigan, there were people who thought, that he would be more than what he was with the Ravens. And he kind of got buried there. And the Giants made the trade to get him. And, I think it's fair to say he has become a valuable reserve.
Well, very, very much like Tyree Phillips, right? A guy based on last season, what you're operating with. You always want these guys to elevate their game. But Bredesen was a solid option last season. Unfortunately, he suffered the knee injury and missed a good portion of the season. Let's head back to the phone lines. Jason is in New Haven, joining us here on BBKO. What's happening, Jason? What do you got for us?
Hey, Paul and Lance, how you guys doing?
Hi, good to talk to you.
Good. Thanks for taking my call. I'll make a few quick points about Friday's game. Just before that, Lance, I agree with you about and I won't make this a long topic, about the call on the quarterback. I know the league is trending. I do think it was ticky-tack, but it doesn't matter what I think. That's what the refs are going to call. I will say this at this point, you might as well just put Velcro on the quarterbacks and just have them pull the Velcro instead of touching them, because and like I said, I won't take a whole time on this, because the rule is the rule. But I don't know. To me, it's just frustrating. But I'll just leave it at that. That's another topic for another time. A few players. Me with preseason, I'm big on let's escape without big injuries, and let's see what some of our backups and some of our fringe players look like. So my eyes, to me, were fixated on Timon Fox and Baldonado and Riley. And I thought those three dudes really made a case. Now, of course, I'm not going to say, they're opening day 53 roster guys. But to me, Fox has really nice bend. Baldonado uses his hands very well. He's very strong. When I read the pre-draft measurements, he has pretty big hands. So it showed on camera. And then Riley, I think he came in a great room. I mean, when you look at it, he has Ashawn in that room, Dexter, Leo, Nacho, Andre Patterson. He has Brian Cox. So he has a very, very veteran coaching staff and players. So I'm excited to see what Riley can do. Now, he may be practice squad this year, just to get some seasoning, but I kind of want to see what his projection is going to look like in another year or two. And, he has long arms. He pushed away I think it was they pulled and Detroit, and he just swatted the guard away. And I'm like, okay.
Oh, he's a big
that's
guy.
A pop play to me.
Yeah. They drafted him because of his measurements more than anything else, because his production at Oregon was not overwhelming. But his measurements said, hey, you know what? He is a big, wide body, an elephant, if you will, in the trenches. Let's take a shot on him and see if he can be a run stuffer in this league. And he did play the run pretty well for the most part the other night, and that's true.
Yeah.
I also want to tell you that Brian Dable said exactly what you said 30 seconds ago. And that is he loves the veteran leadership in that room and says it's incredibly valuable to a guy like Jordan Riley because he's soaking up a tremendous amount of wisdom.
Okay. All right. Well, I didn't hear that, but I just had thought about he's in a really great situation for a young player. A few more points. The secondary to me, I won't get too excited, but to me, This is the most excited I've been about our secondary in a long time. Just based off of youth and projection and upside, we potentially may have had two pretty decent picks of cornerbacks in the same round. Which, in my opinion, we've struggled with kind of the cornerback selections in the last few years. In my opinion, so the Banks play on Jameson, for him to stay with Jameson, I thought that was a big play. Now everybody would say, oh, Jameson should have caught the ball, or Jameson dropped it. But you know what? Banks is right there, and he made a play. Hey, he made the play, in my opinion. So
I agree with you.
On the play with Pinnock, when he had the interception, I mean, Trey was step for step with the receiver, Trey Hawkins.
Yes, he was.
Pinnock, big play. Belton, you know, he had a big play. He's not going to the side either. He's not relenting with trying to get this starting role. And, Paul, I agree with you. With Wink, he's going to use the 3 safeties. So the starter moniker maybe not be a big deal because Belton always, like I said, I called a few weeks ago, I said Belton has this, like when I saw him last year, he missed a few tackles, which is a big no-no with any defensive coordinator. So he had to sit down and he had the shoulder injury. But he just always seems to be around the ball. And for me, when you have a safety at corner that's always around the ball, to me you have to find a role for him on the defense because, as we all know, we struggled getting turnovers last year as far as interception.
Well, remember, he recovered that fumble on special teams early last season, too.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. So he just seems to always be around the ball. Last point, because I know you got other calls. To me, I'm with you, Paul. I don't see how at this point how Beasley doesn't make this roster. I mean, his movement skills, the way he catches the ball, he just always has the neck of, even in the Dallas days, I used to not hate him as a person.
Oh, he killed the Giants. Are you kidding me?
We could never, we just never could. We could never cover him, and we could never cover with him. It was like he just killed us with 1,000 cuts, and then Denzel kill us over the top.
Yeah, well, he was an elusive player, so there's no doubt about it.
And then the O-line, I wouldn't get too, I know, of course, his fans are like, oh, what's going on? It's O-line. Like you guys said, Wyatt was out of position. We had a lot of players that, they weren't going to play Andrew, of course. Neil had concussions. I mean, I wouldn't get too negative on the O-line yet. Let's see. To me, I've always said O-line to me is about chemistry and gelling. Yeah. So we potentially may have the same 5 starters outside of Schmitz, which I think, me personally, I think he's going to start. And I hear what you're saying, Paul. We don't want to give him the job. But to me, he's starting. I mean, that's just my opinion. But we're potentially going to have the same 4 starters from last year, except for Schmidt. So I wouldn't get too worried. I think those guys will probably play this week. I would like to see them at least get 2 or 3 series just to get the engine going, just to get them, used to each other. And, we'll see where we are at the end of the training camp.
I'll give you 2 quick comments.
Yeah, appreciate the phone
Before you go, 2 quick comments. Number 1, on the offensive line, I would feel a lot better if the starting 5 offensive linemen got some snaps together before the Dallas game. That's number 1, because I'm a big proponent in the fabric of that O-line, and I don't necessarily like the lack of continuity by not having those guys play together before week 1. So that would be my take on it. It may not be possible, though, because Neil is still in the protocol. Yeah. So that's one thing about your point on the offensive line. In terms of the other point about the corners, these may be the best pair of corners the Giants have taken in a draft since 2001, when they took Will Allen out of Syracuse in the first round, and then they took Will Peterson in the 3rd round. And both of those guys turned out to be starters for several years. Obviously, Peterson then had the injury to his back and wound up leaving the Giants, and Will Allen went to Miami as a free agent when they signed Sam Madison to come to the Giants. But that's reminiscent of the fact that they've drafted 2 corners in the same draft that appear to have a lot of upside. It's been a long, long time. Think about that, 2001.
Well, and also the benefits, if you could get 2 guys to be cornerstones on defense, think about how much that frees up from a free agency perspective, too. I mean, that's where the true value is. As far as the offensive line is concerned, the caller brought up 4 starters from last year, but let's take that back a few steps, okay? Ben Bredesen was out of the lineup, as I mentioned, with the knee injury.
Right.
Bredesen didn't play 1 snap next to John Michael Schmitz. Mark Glowinski didn't play 1 snap next to John Michael Schmitz. And then Evan Neal was out of the lineup. So Glowinski and Neal weren't next to each other. So, yeah, 4 of the 5 back, but then you do the math and you look at the injuries, there's not a lot of a sample size to work with in terms of the unit coming back. So, yeah, I'm with you from a continuity standpoint, but something tells me I don't think they're going to go out of their way to give those 5 guys an overwhelming amount of snaps in the preseason.
I don't know. Brian Dable has not indicated how important that is to him. Now, I did ask him the other day for the pregame show against Detroit, Do you ever ask your veterans in particular about how many snaps they might want? Because I think it's easy to say head coach and his staff and his medical people will kind of play with the numbers and then figure out how many reps they want everybody to get. And Dable has talked about that. But I said, well, do you ever ask the players? I mean, there were some guys like Bobby Okereke told us today. He said, I wish I could have played. McKinney said, I wish I could have played the other night. You know, sometimes these guys want those reps. And you know, Dave's pretty much said, hey, no, the staff has a formula. They talk about it. They consider what they want to do. And they've got a mission as to how they're going to handle the preseason snaps. You know, I'm not going to say I totally disagree with that, but I do think there's something to be said for a veteran who may have been around a few years who says, you know, I think I could use these to feel more comfortable. Can I get a couple of series in? Because I'd like to get a little rust off, or I'd like to get a little bit of oil, you know, on the ball bearings. Just a thought.
No, and I'm with you, but I also look back at last season. Remember when they rotated a little bit at left guard with Nick Gates? If you're rotating guys, then not to say chemistry and continuity doesn't matter, but I think you have faith that if you do mix and match a little bit, the guys are smart enough that they can handle playing next to somebody who maybe they didn't have the bulk of the reps next to.
You would hope.
That's my takeaway based on track record and trends from last season. One other thing I also wanted to throw out with respect to the cornerbacks, not to take anything away from Pinnock and what you saw in terms of the coverage with Trey Hawkins, but Tamon Fox helped make that play. I mean, he got a great hit on Nate Sudfeld,
the pressure
which
was there.
impacted how he got rid of the ball. I'm not saying, but in an ideal world, if Sudfeld is able to go through the pocket, step back, and put a little oomph on that pass,
no doubt.
I don't know what happens with respect to the coverage. Remember, those things go hand in hand. You can't overlook that.
See, you just made Wink Martindale so happy. He's watching this show on the archive, and he's got a big smile on his face.
Absolutely.
And you know why? Because he's telling people, we didn't get a sack on that play. We got a pressure, and we got a quarterback hit. We didn't get a sack, but what did we get? We got a turnover.
And we disrupted the quarterback.
Bingo.
Yeah.
This is all about the philosophy that, oh, you got to have sacks. Sacks are great. No. It's about the pressures.
Impact the play.
That's it.
Yeah.
Impact the play. That's what Wink preaches.
Sure.
It's not about number of sacks. It's about sacks along with the hurries and the quarterback hits.
The combination.
That's the number that you need to pay attention to.
Yeah. I mean, listen, sacks are great because that means there's a completion closure to the play. So you're never going to turn down a sack, but there's a way to create and take away the ball without getting a sack. And that, I think,
Lord knows the
is
Giants
lesson
didn't
learned.
have enough interceptions last year. They were last in the NFL.
Yeah, they were tied with the Raiders with 6. So you definitely want to see that number increase. All right, let's head back to the phone lines. We got Greg in New Haven joining us. What's happening, Greg? What's on your mind?
Hey, how you guys are doing, man? It's been a while.
Right.
What's going on, Paul and Lance?
Hi.
I'm calling just for a couple of reasons. One, just to speak on the preseason game, and the one thing that I saw and I wanted to get you guys' opinion on is, if I'm correct, I think Tyrod Taylor left a game last year, and he was hurt with the concussion.
Yeah, he got hit on a run
and
play.
I don't know. Yes, and to me, he seemed kind of not himself. I guess I would say, like, when he started the game, I was excited, but some of his decision making to me seemed a little odd. And then it seemed like he got hurt on that play where he scrambled for the first down, and he could have clearly got out of bounds, and the play was over. He had the first down. He kept going, and then got hit by a guy on the sideline. And from home on the TV, it looked like his helmet was a little crooked. So I was like, I wonder, did he get hurt on that play as well? And then my other two things I want to speak on, and I'll give y'all a bold prediction, and I'll take it off air. A couple of years ago, I called, maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, and I spoke about a guy named Darius Rush coming out of South Carolina. And I was like, the Giants should look at this guy. He's 6'2", and he didn't graduate that year that I spoke on him. He graduated the next year. That's why we couldn't find him. And he got drafted by the Indianapolis Colts, and he had a pick six Saturday. And I just thought of us, and I was like, they took him in the 3rd round. I wanted to know what you guys thought about him. And it was one more thing I wanted to speak about. Oh, Lance, about a year or two ago, me and you had a conversation, and I was saying,
what do you take notes on every conversation? I mean, jeez. Go ahead.
No, not really. No,
yeah.
I just didn't call in a while, so while I'm here,
that's
I
okay.
Sure.
Please go right ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and me and you, we were talking, and I was saying the Giants lack the leader on defense, and you were saying that the guys get paid, they don't need a leader. And I wanted to know your opinion on Jihad Ward, because I think he's the leader that I was referring to. Like, I know these guys are paid well and don't need a leader, but sometimes you need a vocal guy in the locker room to get guys straight or focused, I guess was my opinion then. And I just wanted to know what you thought about that. And lastly, and I'll take all the comments back off air, guys, is my bold prediction is Jalen Hyatt, 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. Have a great
that would be some rookie year. All right, Greg. Well, appreciate the phone call. Thanks for giving us a ring here.
You know, Hyatt said the other day that one of his goals would be to win the NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year award.
I'd say that would do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those numbers would absolutely get him that award.
Well, that is a bold prediction because with all the wide receivers, Darren Waller, the running backs, I mean,
they got him out of there quickly the other day, by the way. He was only in for a few plays.
Yeah, well, it's understandable. I mean, he also got some good work in against the Lions in joint practices and over the course of the early stages of training camp, too. So I don't think he necessarily hurts by not playing that much in the first preseason game. As far as some of the other points, there was a plethora of points, so I have to take notes myself. As far as the Jihad Ward point, we'll go backwards. Yeah, I think Jihad Ward is a vocal leader and a strong presence in the locker room. I'm not denying that. I don't remember the context of the conversation we had 2 or 3 years ago.
You don't?
But I do have the stance, because I think I preach this consistently, that I don't think you need a babysitter in the locker room. Meaning, I don't think you need a scene out of the Little Giants every single week before a game, okay? Where you get rah-rah and get guys to want to bang their heads against the lockers in order to go out and play. I think there's a lot of players that are self-motivated, and I'm sure that was my main point when we were having that conversation. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have leaders in the locker room. I just don't think you need somebody holding the hands of the majority of your players. That was my point.
I think that can depend on locker room to locker room. There are some locker rooms who need that more than others. I think that's fair.
It'll vary, sure. Yeah. But I think if you take a poll and you look at, and you have a heart-to-heart conversation with most guys who make it to the NFL level, I think the reason why they made it this far, Paul, is they are self-motivated. They know what it takes, and they have to play at a high level. I don't think you get here by luck and chance of somebody continuing to hold your hand and push you. So that's, I think, a major takeaway if you go locker room to locker room.
I will say this locker room is full of pros, because that's the kind of guy that Joe Shane wants in this locker room and Brian Dable wants in this locker room. And it's quite clear that they have built those types of characteristics into their roster.
Darius Rush was brought up, who went to the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, listen, we could do this exercise after every single draft, the coulda, woulda, shoulda game. I wish my team took this player. And nice play in the preseason, but if we're not crowning any Giants players after one preseason game, then we certainly shouldn't be crowning any other rookie on another team because he wound up getting a pick six. Let's see what transpires with respect to the career overall.
I don't remember where Rush was picked in the third round, but let's not forget the Giants got Jalen Hyatt in the third round, and I don't think they're crying any tears over that.
Well, but that's also the point. Let's see how the careers pan out, though, too.
Sure.
Right? I mean, we're comparing things when they barely have even played a professional football game under the circumstances. Let's head back to the phone lines. Vince is in Florida joining us here on BBKO. What's happening, Vince? What do you got for us?
Hey, guys.
Hi.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in.
Huge fan. I was at wide right, and actually we were at the Titans game, and I had the pleasure of sitting right next to Lawrence Taylor, was on the same plane.
Very nice.
So, it was awesome. Dream come true. So, guys, real quick comment, question. Is anyone else noticing the similarities between Daniel Jones and his first years compared to Phil Simms? I mean, I see a kid who's cerebral, who's tough, who's, on and off the field, bleeds blue, and I don't see where this kid gets any respect from anyone else outside of our little area. And it kind of similar to, how does Thomas not make the top 100? I can't figure it out. It kind of goes to that. Any thoughts on those two things?
You're right in that Phil did not have a lot of respect from the folks when he got here. Remember, the Pete Rozelle, the commissioner, was booed horribly when he announced that Phil Simms was a #1 pick for the Giants in 1979. And, I don't think that Daniel Jones, drew that kind of response. At least people knew he was a first-round pick. A lot of people didn't think Simms was a first-round pick when the Giants took him. So I think you're talking about a little bit of a different situation coming into the league. But what I will say is Phil showed his toughness early on and only got tougher and tougher and tougher as his career progressed. And I think we're seeing the same thing from Daniel Jones. He showed some guts and fortitude as a rookie and did some really nice things and flashed. And since then has gotten more physical, has gotten tougher, has certainly become a little more durable, and has become more of a leader. And, in that regard, if you want to compare him to Phil, I wouldn't fight you on that.
Yeah, I think the injury parallel is something that comes to light,
Phil
right?
got banged up
badly. Guys
badly.
in and out of the lineup, so different times, different game.
Now, by the way, Phil ran a lot in his first few years, and that's, he was getting banged up and he was hurt, but he was running for his life a lot. It was much more of a scrambler than people remember, because then when he finally seized the job after a few years of the injuries, and he had then beaten out Scott Bruner for the job, from that point forward, Phil wasn't known as a runner. But his first few years in the league, he was running around a lot, but it was out of desperation. It was trying to survive. Daniel runs a lot not out of desperation. He runs a lot because it's part of the game plan. That's different.
And the other thing that I would throw out is maybe not as much turnover, but Phil had a few coaches in terms of Parcells.
Well, he had Perkins.
Yeah, Perkins.
He had Perkins, and then he had Parcells.
Yeah, so there was some movement, at least early in his career. I wouldn't say not as much
Daniel's
as Daniel.
had to go through a lot
Daniel,
more.
that's what I said. They're not identical, but there was some turnover is all I'm saying in terms of the play calling.
I would not use a paintbrush and say that the Simms-Jones comparison is crystal clear across the board. I think that's a mistake.
And as far as Andrew Thomas, first of all, my response would be, I really don't think rankings mean much of anything, Vince, at the end of the day.
Don't waste your time with that,
I don't know
please.
why fans get irritated over it. It means nothing. Who wins a Super Bowl based on where they were ranked on some person's chart? Doesn't mean anything. And the other thing, though, in terms of maybe dismissing it and blaming it on the media, keep in mind, unless I'm wrong, Paul, the NFL Top 100 is voted on by players. That has nothing to do with the media. So if you are annoyed that a player didn't make the top 100 list, you got to take that up with his fellow teammates and the guys around the league. That has nothing to do with no respect outside of the New York, New Jersey media.
What people don't know, and I'm going to take the cloak off of this whole thing, that NFL Top 100, do you know how that's done? Several months ago, this goes back quite a ways, they pass around a ballot. The NFL Network gives a ballot to every player. They send a whole stack to each team, and they say, give this to every player, put it on his locker. This goes back many, many, many months. And they say, okay, have your players fill this thing out and get it back to us. Seriously, that's how it works.
And the Pro Bowl is the same thing. So, it's a popularity contest. How much time do those guys take to fill out those ballots? I'd love to see that. You don't know. You don't know how much effort they even put
I don't even know how many ballots come back.
Well, that's another thing. Yeah,
they never tell you that.
That's a good point. Yeah, so
they never tell you that. And I know players who don't really pay attention to it, and it gets crumpled up and thrown in the garbage.
Rankings mean nothing. Whether it's team rankings, individual rankings, it means nothing. Players are judged based on what they do on the field when the season starts. That's how legacies are defined, not by some random media outlet or individual putting rankings together. That's why I would not lose very much of any sleep over that, Vince. I think
I just thought because that was by the players, I thought he would have got a couple more votes, but I didn't. I think those are some great points about how the voting is going, and with his new paycheck, who cares what everyone else thinks, right, guys?
I could tell you, I'm sure Andrew Thomas is not losing sleep, and appreciate the phone call considering the new luxurious contract that he just received. I don't know. Wealth and security for the rest of your life, or missing out on the top 100 on NFL.com for 1 year. something tells me I think he'll be able to survive.
I think we'll take the contract.
Yeah, well, I forget us. I think he'll take the contract.
I think he will.
So that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Fun fact, I used to edit some of those videos for NFL's 100 list when I was at NFL Films.
Well, did they ask you to vote then, Pearson?
I always get a vote, yes.
You always get a vote. Okay, there you go.
Pearson, square business. Come on, help me pull back the curtain. How many actual votes do you think came in when you were there?
See, I don't know about the voting. I just know
he just cut
once
the
I
videos.
just get the list and then we make the videos.
He doesn't tally the votes.
Because I'm telling you right now, they don't get all those ballots back. It just does not happen.
No, I'm sure
it does not happen.
I guarantee you they give it to a guy in his locker, and he probably sees the closest trash can, and he may throw it out.
Some of them use it as a napkin to wipe off the grease after their lunch.
So, I don't think everybody who is handing them out is then looking it over very carefully to see what they did with them and then keeping a tally of it. I just don't think that's how it works. I think it's an informal process. And think about it. They reveal it and they unveil it during the heart of the offseason. Why? Because it gives additional content for the league. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it has no indication or impact on what lies ahead come the regular season. And I don't think, most players really care about it in the long run. I don't think, once again, they're putting a lot of stock in substance in it.
I'm telling you, they get that ballot. Yeah. I want to say it's like November or December of last season. Before last season is even over, the players get the ballot that says, vote for the 2023 top 100. Seriously.
Well, because they need time to count up the votes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sure.
Whatever.
Not a big deal in the big picture of things. All right, that is going to wrap up Monday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. A reminder that today's episode and every episode is part of the Giants platforms everywhere and Giants.com/podcast. We'll be up and running again at 1:30 p.m. Eastern for Tuesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. For Paul Dottino, I'm Lance Medow. Stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest, and we'll speak to you on Tuesday right here on BBKL. Have a good one.